Right then. Thank you very much, Andrew. Yeah, sounds really scintillating, doesn't it? Human factors and how we can improve safety. But I don't know. Hopefully we can make it, relatively entertaining. The whole point of this is that hopefully we can have a bit of a discussion. As those of you that know, I can't do these things without some. What was that? All right.
Mute everyone in the room.
Yeah, without some.
Just unmute yourself, mate.
Why is it muted?
Yeah, you're good.
Very odd. Anyway, so because you did it, didn't you? Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
So no, please do unmute yourself, and we can have a chat, and we'll see what you think of all these points. Anyway, let's move on. So I thought about maybe an hour, or maybe a bit shorter, and then we can have a beer at the end, or maybe a beer now. So what we're going to talk about is what the kind of things that we focus on while we're training, while we're doing our flying training, and what we might want to focus on a little bit more. And just to kind of bring things into focus a bit, maybe some accidents and incidents as discussion points. And we'll finish off with just maybe a little bit of theory, not much, a little bit, and perhaps some conclusions. And you may or may not agree with me, but that'd be interesting to know what you think about all this stuff. It's quite interesting, well, I think so anyway, that when you start talking about this stuff, I always think, Christ, this is going to turn everybody off because it's so, it's theory stuff, it's not flying. But actually, most of the instructing stuff that I do, people do seem to be reasonably interested in the way people think and the way we can think of it differently to try and reduce accidents. Anyway, so what do we focus on in training? So when you're learning to fly, what are the things that you focus on? Genuine question, guys. Don't all shout at once.
Mm-hmm.
Safety.
Yeah, safety, but in what sense? What kind of subjects?
Controlling the aircraft.
Yeah, flying the aircraft.
Look out.
Looking out, making sure you're not going to hit somebody else. Yeah.
Aircraft worthy.
Who was that?
That was Maria joining in.
Sorry, joining in.
Saying the aircraft has to be sufficiently worthy.
Yeah, aircraft airworthiness, having a look around it, making sure that all documentation and stuff are in one piece. Yeah.
Speed is always an important one. Throughout your trainings, constantly speed is drummed into you.
Yeah, speeds to fly at various bits of the flight, so that you don't overstress, that you've got enough energy in hand, so that you're going to be safe when you're flying, not stalling and spinning, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Anything else?
The weather.
Weather, yeah, absolutely.
Wind direction, strength, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, where's the wind coming from? How's that going to affect our circuit and all that kind of stuff?
Don't turn up drunk.
Indeed.
Completing checks.
What? Sorry.
Completing checks.
Yeah, the checks, just so that we don't forget stuff. Yeah, that's it. But one of the things that we're probably taught is airmanship. But how are we taught airmanship when we're learning to fly? Things like, I don't know, the way you should fly a circuit, or the things that you should think about before you get into the glider, or the way you should perhaps position the gliders to make things simpler for you when you're flying around the circuit, or make it simpler for the other guy when there might be a potential conflict in the circuit, or even in a thermal or something like that. How do you get taught those more airy-fairy kind of things?
By experiences, I think, and being shouted at.
Well, certainly, hopefully not now. Hopefully not at the Staffordshire Gliding Club.
You know what I mean? It's by getting it wrong and having people explain how to improve things.
Yeah, to a certain extent, it's these things happening to you, and perhaps, I don't know, you're following somebody around the circuit who's a bit lower, and so you're thinking, where are they going to go? You know, what are we going to do in response? Or they're following you, and you know they're there, and you're worrying about, you know, okay, well, what do they think we're going to do next? Those are the kind of airmanship issues, aren't they? You know, what to do in a thermal, how to join a thermal, the etiquette around the thermal, and how to keep things really nice and safe. Maybe we need to focus a little bit more on those things when we're training, because what we focus on a great deal is mainly how you actually, you know, stick and rudder fly the glider, the checks that you do before you get in, the you know, the speeds that you fly, as Andrew was saying, and some of the, you know, mostly it's the nuts and bolts of how to fly around, you know, how to fly the aircraft itself. Also, of course, there are decision making when we're flying circuits, and you know, what to do after launch failures. And then as we perhaps get out into the wide world a bit more, how we deal with, you know, the wider stuff like field landing situations, and, you know, what the kind of crops are and all that kind of stuff. But it's very much more than the nuts and bolts of things. So when you're in this is actually a picture here from John Williams, the Scottish John Williams, of one of his flights in the wilds of Scotland. There he is climbing at 8 knots. How fast is he going? He's normally going quite fast. No, he's not going that fast, actually. He's only doing 65 knots in that case. But yeah, now he knows that there's somewhere to land around there. But yeah, it looks pretty inhospitable, doesn't it? So when you start to get to the stage where you're doing perhaps more adventurous things, then you start to have to think ahead a lot more about what you're doing and what's going to happen if, for instance, in this situation, he couldn't climb at 8 knots, or he couldn't climb at all, and he needs to go away and do something different. So you start to have to think a little bit more about the contingencies, and you have to think ahead. And sometimes that means thinking ahead before you even get in the glider, but also it means thinking ahead sometimes when you're actually in the glider itself. So an example from me, when a couple of years ago, I went for a flight from Salford down to Talgarth, because I love it down there. It's nice and picturesque, and you know, you can fly along the ridge. But on this particular day, the wind was actually northeasterly, so none of the ridge really was going to work. There was quite a lot of cloud cover, and it was one of those times where I just said, "Oh, sod it, I'll just keep going." And something always happens at Talgarth. You know, there'll be some opportunity to stay up. Anyway, long story short, I ended up sat on this tiny bit of ridge going up and down with this, you know, bit of sun on it, but not much, and no thermals around. And but the biggest problem was not that I couldn't stay up on this ridge, which I just about could do in the old LS4, as going up and down. But I really, really, really needed a piss. I really needed a wee. And that was the only thing I could think about for, you know, 10 or 20 minutes. And because the workload was so high going up and down on this bit of ridge, I had to land at Talgarth, get out, go to the toilet, and then get an aerotow. The only reason that I had to do that is because I didn't have a pee when I was crossing the valley to the hills. I should have done that because I knew that it was going to be a challenge. I knew that the wind was in the wrong direction for the ridge to work, and I knew that there wasn't very much sun on the ground, which meant that, there weren't going to be very many thermals. So I knew it was going to be a challenge, but I didn't anticipate, and I didn't think to myself, right, I need to get myself in order here. I need to have a pee, I need to have a drink, I need to have a bite to eat and a sandwich. I need to figure out, all the attributes of what this challenge is going to be. And because I failed in that, the simplest thing, like needed a pee, meant that I had to land at Targarth. Now, for some people, of course, that the workload might go up and up and up to the stage where actually they end up crashing because of one stupid little thing that you just haven't thought ahead of early enough. Do you see what I mean? Has anybody else got an example, maybe not quite like mine, but an example perhaps where you haven't thought ahead and you wished you had, in order to save yourself some workload a bit later on in the flight?
Yeah, when I did my 300k in the K6, I did a 3-turn point. Went down to Ludlow using the GPS, fine. Went back up to Crewe, fine. Turned there, and I wanted to go back to a village close to Ludlow. Played with the Garmin. The turn point wasn't in it. I just hadn't checked before I took off that all the waypoints I planned to use were actually in the instrument. So I was left with trying to refold a full chart in a K6 cockpit, which is not best. And it did get me rather annoyed to such an extent that the next thermal I ran in as I left Crewe, it was a real strong one, and I took it instantly. And I forgot that I was just on the boundary of the 4.5 level going into the 5.5 level. I was dead lucky. I had just crossed that line. So I ended up with a good flight, but just pure luck and not actually planning ahead.
Yeah, so because your workload was really high, you were trying to refold a map, you're trying to figure out where you were, you're trying to thermal, you're trying to stay, fly the glider, you're trying to do all these things at the same time. And then suddenly you get this feeling in the pit of your stomach, don't you? Hold on a minute.
Yeah, something's not quite right here.
And then, you look at the GPS and you think, oh, thank God, I'm on the right side of the line.
Yeah.
I know the feeling well. So yeah, I think it's fairly important stuff, and not just for kind of cross-country flying, but also just for flying around the airfield. But let's have a look at a fairly dramatic incident, or actually accident. Have you anybody read the accident report of this situation that's on the BGA website? Pete Gill's nodding.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Yeah.
No, it's worth, one or two of you have. It's worth a read. If you Google something like BGA accident report Discus or just BGA accident report, you'll find them. And it's actually incredible. So they ended up trying to ridge saw the Discus on the south, on the White Cliffs of Dover, essentially on the south coast there, and it just never worked. And they very rapidly ran out of options, with the only one in the end being essentially ditching or crashing into the ocean, into the English Channel, and that was the end of a very nice Discus turbo. And one of them almost had a problem trying to get just back to the shore, because there are lots of big rocks, as you can see actually in this picture. But why did this accident happen? Well, when you read the report, P1, the guy sat in the front, and the guy who knew how to fly on the cliffs was shoehorned into the glider to show another instructor cliff soaring. So there were two, and P2 was very experienced. In fact, I think P2 was a senior instructor at the club as well. But P1 felt like he was under pressure to give P2 a good flight. But pilot in command P1 had quite a stressful morning. He'd had to sort out an issue with his car, and he was rushing around like mad because he had to do something else. And then he'd come to the club actually to relax and, you know, chew the fat with his mates. When he got to the club, he realised that his duo Discus, or his syndicate duo Discus, was down at the launch point. And as soon as he got there, he was kind of pressurised to get in the front and show this other guy how to soar the cliffs. So you can imagine that he was actually quite stressed out at that point. He'd had a stressful morning. He hadn't got into the kind of frame of mind for flying, and he was you know, probably hadn't checked the NOTAMs and all that kind of stuff, which, you know, leads to stress. It certainly does for me when I'm kind of shoehorned in. You're sitting in the glider, think, oh Christ, you know, I haven't checked this, that, and the other, and I don't know, did I actually check around the glider properly, you know, and all this kind of stuff. It can be quite stressful. The glider did have an engine, so that just kind of adds to the potential stress. It just adds to the complexity. It could, of course, have gotten out of the problem, but they chose not to use it, or not to use it in time anyway. And actually, in the final accident sequence, they never got the engine out at all. A field was identified, but the crew were tempted on by radar call. Yeah. So if you read the accident report, just as they've chosen this field on top of the cliffs, their friend calls them up and says, "Oh, the ridge is working better around the corner," essentially. So they decide to leave this field and carry on. But of course, what they didn't realise at that point is that they just committed themselves to either one, the ridge working, or two, that it wouldn't work, and they were going to end up in the sea, because that, you know, they were kind of level with the ridge stop at this point. Yeah, once below the cliffs, there was only two options left. So it was an amazing accident, really, because when you look at the track, all they did was fly out from the aerotow. They tested the engine, put that away, carried on. The ridge didn't work, and they just carried on flying until they hit the sea. But these were two really, really successful, and, well, not in this case, but you know, really, really experienced glider pilots. So how the hell do you get into a situation where you kind of accept that situation? Well, what really went wrong? Was it the absence of skill or flying ability? No, they could both fly the glider perfectly well. So all that time that you spend in your training, when you're training to fly the glider, and when you're, you know, getting your speed control right, that was all good stuff. There wasn't any problems with that. They didn't spin into the ocean. They didn't lose height by stalling. They didn't, you know, there are no other problems like that. What they got wrong was the mental side of thinking ahead. So the kind of human factors side, there was plenty of fatigue, maybe no flight plan, or not so much flight planning, and maybe not in the right simple mindset for the task in hand. CRM is crew resource or cockpit resource management. So they're both fairly experienced pilots, but who was really making the decisions? Who's heard of the bystander effect? Anybody? Phil's nodding. That's good. A resident human factors expert, I should think, actually. I don't know why I'm doing this. The bystander effect is a really good, yeah. Have you guys ever seen a launch happen at Seiford when everybody stood around and you're thinking, actually, that launch probably shouldn't have happened because there's a glider in the way, or there's, you know, some other factor happening, but nobody's actually willing to stick up the hand and say, oh, I think we should stop this launch now, especially if there's lots of experienced pilots around. Anybody ever seen that?
Yeah, had it happen.
Yeah. So it's a proven kind of psychological problem that when there's more than one person involved with making a decision, that both people are probably going to defer that decision to the other. Do you see what I mean? And especially when there's a lot of people around, like at the launch point at Seiford, nobody might be willing to stick up the hand and say, hey, I think we should stop. And, you know, we've got to recognize that, and recognize that actually, if you think that, then you've got to be the person that says, hey, we should stop the launch, or we should do something like this, or have we thought of this that might be a problem today? Now, it's a pretty standard setup at Seiford, but that can still happen. Anybody got any comments about that?
That happened a few weeks ago for me. We had, somebody had a cable break, and the strop had fallen on the field, and one of the guys had gone in the buggy to go and try and locate the strop in the middle of the field, and I was at the launch point. And as you know, at the east end of the field, you can't see the lower ground. And it turns out I launched on a winch launch, but actually the buggy was still in the middle of the field. And really, in hindsight, we shouldn't have launched. But yeah. We didn't realize I didn't realize till afterwards because I couldn't see the buggy.
There were probably people around that thought, where's that buggy? Oh, nobody's saying anything, so it must be okay. Yeah. It's possible. And you know, we're certainly not trying to, you know, nail anybody tonight, but you know, these things do happen. And occasionally you've just got to be, you know, when we're talking about this this Discus accident, you know, you would hope that even if you were the second pilot, you'd be the person to say, do you know what, we shouldn't carry on, because if we do, we're out of options. We've got to land here, and we can't use the engine now either because we're too low. Or earlier on, why don't we use the engine? And we can just kind of test it out. We're not in a competition or anything. There's no point, you know. Let's just test it out first, and let's try. Now, I'm not sitting here saying that I would necessarily make those decisions. I might be the one in the water, because it's too easy to sit here in our comfy chairs and you know, and say, well, they should have this, that, and the other. Because I know that, well, I certainly know one of the pilots, and you know, very sensible chap. But sometimes you just got to be the person that says, hey guys, hold on. Has anybody thought about this? Or in a cockpit, hey, P1, have you thought about this? Do you get me? Oh,
yeah, Mike.
Can I just, I haven't read the report, but it certainly looks like it's another HR term, which is, or HF term rather, is called risky shift. I don't know if you've heard of that one, and it is almost guaranteed when you've got two senior pilots flying together, you know, because they end up sort of even subconsciously ending up talking each other into a situation, you know, like 2 and 2 is 22. And because one hasn't made said anything towards it, the other one thinks, well, if he isn't saying anything, then this decision must be right. And yeah, there's been airliners flying into the side of mountains due to this problem. And you know, there's lots of accident incident reports where the chief pilot and the chief instructor have ended up bending an aeroplane because they did something bloody stupid because they were in this risky shift situation. So it's very prevalent when you've got experienced guys and it's one of the things that you should always consider when you're getting a little bit further out of the junior phase into the intermediate phase that you've got to watch.
Yeah. And also there's another thing called, what's it called? When you go against the rules over and over and over again, and you get more and more complacent that, yeah, it's okay. Well, we did it last week and it's fine.
Normalized deviation, I think it's called, Mike.
Yeah, that's right. Normalization of deviation. Yeah, who said that? Richard, I think.
Yeah, it was myself. Yeah, Richard.
Yeah, so maybe
Just eating dinner, which is why we turned the camera off.
Oh, no worries. Yeah. So maybe these guys have flown, or certainly the P1 had flown along that section of the ridge before, and it felt the same, and it got lower and lower, and that's definitely been the case with especially ridge accidents lately, where people get to the stage where they actually, fly. They get used to flying lower and lower and lower on the ridge. And there's been several. In fact, I'll show you an accident in a minute, where they start talking about tens of feet instead of hundreds of feet as being kind of normal. I thought I'd clear the last tree by 70 feet or something, but I got a bit of sink. You think 70 feet, Christ, but that it kind of becomes normal to them. So yeah, that accident was nothing to do with the way they flew the glider. So we spend an awful lot of time spinning and stalling and doing circuits and out of position and all this kind of stuff. Well, the circuits is a bad example, because I think there's a lot to do with the decision making in the circuit. But certainly the nuts and bolts of flying is very important, but also is important is the decision making as you're going along. So here's a slightly simpler accident. This was a K-21 on a training flight. There are a couple of things that kind of caught them out. So there were two-seater on instructor. I will read a bit of this out, death by PowerPoint. It's not really my normal style, but anyway, there you go. It was operating in the usual location, but with the opposite wind. So it was actually, this one was at Husbos. And the glider was operating where we always, I've done a lot of flying at Husbos, and we always used to operate over Stengun Lake when we're training, but that's with a wind from the west, because that would blow us back towards the airfield. But in this case, the tuggy dropped them in a very familiar place, but with a wind from the east instead. So they felt secure, but actually when they straightened up to head back, unfortunately, they realized that they were actually quite a long way away and a bit low. And there's a bit of rain started, I believe, as well. And this was the one actually where when you read the accident report, the report says things like, yeah, I thought I could clear the trees by a few feet, but actually there was sink behind them. Of course there's sink behind them, because actually behind those trees is also a quarry. And so the air goes down quite nicely over the trees and then down the other side and down the quarry as well. So unfortunately, they got sucked down by an invisible hand of death. Fortunately, not death in this case, and they got cradled quite nicely by the trees on the edge of the road on the way in. So what happened there? Well, they just kept going hopefully. Has anybody ever kept going hopefully in this virtual room? Pete? Yeah.
Yeah.
Derek? Yeah. A few others? Yeah. Bill? Yeah. You kind of just keep going. And I've done it. I've done it myself. And when you get back on the ground, if you do that, and if you keep going hopefully, you get back on the ground, hopefully you're going to be lucky and you will make it back. You've got to use that as a lesson to always have an out, always have something, but you've got to take it. And you get so transfixed and so kind of tunneled into just looking at the end of the airfield and hoping that you'll make it, that a lot of people don't take those outs. anybody who stuck their hand up earlier had a similar kind of situation where they just thought, oh, I've just got to make it, you know, and wished perhaps they'd landed out. I don't know.
Yeah, second solo flight at Norwich and first flight in the K-18. I remembered how to soar, but not where I was. And I was on for a final glide, except there was a hill in the way. I finished up on the side of the hill. It was pure luck.
Really? So you just kind of almost hit the hill, really?
Yeah.
But it was flat enough to get away with.
Quite gently.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll call it a landing, shall we?
I certainly had one with Simon, who's on the talk tonight as well, and thankfully I had Simon sat behind me because I was in training, and I wanted to go for a nice cloud that looked really nice and inviting. Unfortunately, it was downwind on a crosswind day from the club, and it was this lovely looking cloud that looked as though it was working, but it was downwind. And when it didn't work, and I turned back to the airfield into a headwind and couldn't get back, and thankfully Simon was sat behind me, and I heard the words, "I have control," and we landed in the field. So that was a big lesson I learned that day. That's for sure.
What a hero!
Yeah, that's certainly. Well, that's because many years of experience going. No, trying to push it back from here, we end up, you know, effectively from where we were, there was no options between where we were and the airfield. And if you set off, you were committed to going back. But I had a field, so therefore go into the field. Because if you'd set off, you were either we're going to make it back or we're going to crash.
And that's the point, isn't it? So, Pauline, you remember our flights, probably. The top right picture there is us soaring on that flight. Very nice, just the job. Pauline sat in the front, and Pauline telling me, well, I think we're a bit far away, we're a bit downwind. Nah, we're all right, we'll be good. And then straightening up on the way back, and we were a bit marginal, weren't we? You've got to unmute yourself if you want to talk, Pauline, but you might not want to, that's all right. And somebody asked the question, I think it was me, but you know, do you think we'll make it back? And what was the answer, Pauline?
Well, I said no, we wouldn't. You said yes, we would.
You might be right. But then later on,
I kept telling you that I don't think we were going to get there. I remember doing it.
Yeah. I thought, no, we'll be all right. We'll be okay. But then, unfortunately, at the very last moment, well, in the last kind of 2 or 3 kilometers, I thought to myself, I'm not sure if we will. And I suppose I still think that we might have made it back. But of course, might is no good. And I had some experiences before this flight, of course, of just making it back to the airfield and frightening myself. And so we decided that we were going to land out instead, didn't we?
Well, you did. I was quite sure we weren't going to go over the trees.
Yeah, I thought we might make it, but as we said at the time, well, certainly after the event, might is not good enough, because there's only 2 options in that case. You hit the trees and you might injure yourself. You know, you're quite likely to injure yourself if you're going to hit the trees. You're certainly going to write the glider off. Or we can just land over here instead. And now I'm not proud of, you know, I was P1, and I'm not proud of the fact that we probably went a bit far downwind that we should have done. And you know, that was my fault. Pauline was telling me we should go back. Yeah, we'll be all right.
You've got more courage than I have, Mike.
Yeah, more stupidity as well, obviously. But so, yeah.
I think you've learned from this one, Mike, because when we were flying at Denby, it was you to saying, we need to head back now, Richard. And I was saying, no, we'll be all right.
Yeah, you're a bit of a maniac there, Richard. You know, no. So we try not to get into this situation in the first place. But the point that I'm trying to get across here is, number one, always have a plan. Always have something that you can do if you don't think you can do the first plan. Do you see what I mean? But also think ahead. What am I going to do if that doesn't work out? Where am I going to go? So even though I was relatively sure to start with we could get back, I was still looking at places to land, as probably was Pauline as well. So we were still looking at places that we could land. And in the end, you just have to be bold enough to say, no, that's no good. It's not going to work. I need to do this. And that's the safe thing. It's going to be embarrassing. It's going to be expensive in beer. But we and the glider are going to be okay. As long as we execute a decent field landing, we will be. And we just got to take that option. As I say, I'm not advocating this as something that, you know, was a particularly proud moment. But having made that mistake, you don't want to kind of capitalize on that mistake and end up hitting the trees or something. That's exactly what happened, I'm guessing, to Simon and Andrew.
Yeah, can I make a point I think is worth making? Is that I think the one thing that you get in your mind is that it's not a bad thing to land in a field. Landing in a field safely and making a safe field landing is absolutely right and not a problem. But there seems to be a negative, oh my God, he's landed out, you know, he's made a mistake, he's landed out. And I think that's where the embarrassment thing comes from, that stops people from doing it. In a way, you should almost encourage people to, you know, it's absolutely fine in gliding to land in a field. It's perfectly normal and part of the course.
Well, I think you're right. It is fine, but in this case, and probably in your case, it was probably a more risky land out than a normal land out, because it was a last minute turn into a field. Yes, we've been looking at fields. Yes, we've been thinking about what would happen if we didn't have enough height to make it over the trees, but it is still a kind of base leg turn and land in a field, whereas a normal field landing should be much safer because you've got more time to sort things out. And the one thing I was asking Pauline all the way in is, can you see any wires? Can you see any obstructions? Can you see anything that's going to, you know, cause us a big problem? Because that's again, thinking ahead. Right, what's going to leap up and grab us here? What are going to be the big issues if we've got this wrong? The only thing that's going to really hurt is if we hit a cable or something on the way in. Always spin in, of course. But I was trying to avoid that at all costs.
One of the bits that's actually is more of a risk with field landing is actually when you are supposedly local soil, because if you're going cross country, you're in a mood that you will at some point potentially land out. But when all you're doing is a local flight and you suddenly get into, I might have to land out, you have to make sure that you mentally go, no, I'm not local soil, I now need to land out, because that can encourage you to, I need to get back because I'm only local soaring at the moment. And to realise that the world has changed from just a local little bimble round to needing to land out.
Yeah. So as I say, you should plan to avoid this. You don't want to be doing these last minute land outs, but if you need to think ahead. So when we were still, you know, probably a couple of minutes from landing out, I was thinking, right, which way is the wind blowing? Where do I need to land? You know, is there somewhere to land? Do we need to take a different route back to the airfield so that there are places to land on the way? If you don't do that thinking ahead, even when you have messed up, then you stand a much worse chance of getting away with it. Anybody got any other comments on that kind of subject.
Just following what you're saying, anytime you're below 2,000 feet, you need to think of a field, whether it's the home field or somewhere else, because it's the 500-foot choice of a field that goes wrong.
Yeah, and you know, we are not flying powered aeroplanes. I do occasionally try to remind people of that. We don't have an engine. So, you know, there are situations we are relying on our store of energy and kinetic and potential energy, and you know, some things can come along and rob us of that. You know, so yeah, keep your margins nice and high, but also think ahead. If this goes wrong, what am I going to do? And actually, I'll skip past that and that. What time is it? Yeah, let's just have a look at this. We might go back to some of that other stuff. So when we're flying a circuit, then let's look along to stuff that's pretty much just a normal flight on a normal day. Let's imagine that the wind is blowing, I don't know, in this direction. Yeah, so there's a fair old crosswind. And we're flying on the wrong side of the circuit because maybe why do I say the wrong side of the circuit? What do we normally do in the morning briefings?
You're going to be drifting in.
Yeah, so normally we would say do a circuit on the downwind side, wouldn't we? That's the favoured direction for, you know, for doing a circuit. But say we've got a bit low out here somewhere, and so we're doing a circuit on the upwind side. So what are the things that are going to affect us on this circuit? Anybody haven't talked before?
So you'll be pointing away from the airfield rather than looking into it to compensate for the drift.
Absolutely. So we're going to have to point away from the airfield in order to track down this downwind leg, aren't we? And we might even get caught out by it. And to start with, our track line might drift in a bit, and we'll start to cramp things up before we realise. And we realise that we've actually got to point the glider in this direction. That means, well, what does that mean about looking down towards where we're going to land?
It's compromised by the right wing.
Yeah, we can't see it as well.
Yeah.
So we're already slightly stressed out, perhaps. And we're things. The view looks a bit different. We're trying our best to stay away from the landing area. Yeah. What's going to happen to our what's going to happen on the diagonal leg and perhaps even on the base leg as well?
Ground speed is going to be much higher.
Yeah, got a very high ground speed, so it's all going to be over pretty quick. So we're going to, you know, maybe even we've already cramped in. Our ground speed now really high here, and then we end up with this kind of U-turn almost onto an approach. What's going to happen as well on our final turn here, or even here, depending on where it ends up being?
Probably overshoot it.
Yeah, because we got this raging gale blowing up our tail, we're going to overshoot the centre line, aren't we? And so then we're going to have to do this funny kind of S-turny thing to get the glider lined up on the approach. So what that's doing is, eraser, no, I want to clear, that's it. So what that's doing is increasing our workload. So let's just put the workload on there. So the workload actually goes up towards the bottom of this chart. So to start with in our circuit, we realise that things are not quite going to plan, and our workload increases So it's so our workload increases. What that does is it makes our flying go to pot. It starts to reduce our ability to fly the aircraft accurately. And instead of thinking ahead, we start to just react to things that are happening to us instead. And we start to, hopefully, we start to trap some of the errors that are happening. So as we're flying down this, as we're flying down this downwind leg, we realize that we're drifting in towards the landing area, but that's something that doesn't feel right to us. So we realize that's happening, and we try and correct it by flying away from the landing area, but that means that the wing's in the way and we can't see where we're going. And we realize late on that our ground speed's very high and we're cramping up the back of the circuit. We also realize that we've overshot the center line. The workload now is going really, really high. And all it takes, perhaps, is for us to see another glider or something like that we don't notice. And we end up actually overloading ourselves to the stage where we can't actually fly the glider accurately enough that we actually have an issue. And I've seen that happen quite a few times, where people are so overloaded that they bounce the landing, or they're flying too fast, or they stall it on too high. They don't stall it on too high because they can't fly the glider. They stall it on because their workload is really, really high. So just taking this circuit as an example with this crosswind, how could we avoid this in the future?
Return with enough height to fly on the downwind side.
Yeah. So realize that, right, it's going to be a real challenge flying on the upwind side today. So actually, I don't fancy that challenge. Has anybody heard that saying about the what is it? The superior pilot uses his or her, of course, superior skills to avoid the situations that require their superior skills. No, that's not quite right, is it? Anybody would correct me on that.
It's a superior judgment.
Ah, that's it, yeah. They use their superior judgment.
Superior judgment to avoid needing his superior skills.
Yeah, that's it. That's it, exactly.
Mike, and there's the other one as well, where a prudent pilot doesn't take his aircraft where he hasn't taken it a few minutes before in his head or her head. So if you kind of rehearse what you're going to do before you get there, rather than sort of making up as you go along at the last minute.
So I'm sure we've all been there, where all these things have suddenly kind of come at us, and we suddenly realise that this stuff's happening. We suddenly realise that, oh yeah, actually it's quite windy, and I'm whizzing down the downwind leg, and I can't see where I'm going to hit the ground, and I've got this S-turn to do now, and oh my God, I mean, I've certainly been there. So what can we do to avoid it? Hopefully, we can try and just think ahead of the aircraft a little bit. So we can think ahead before we get in the glider. So what are we going to do before we even get in the glider to brief ourselves? This is just a circuit. We'll go off and try and thermal maybe, but we're just going to do a 10-minute circuit perhaps in the K8, something like that. Maybe not with that 25 knot wind, but anyway. So what are we going to think about before we actually get in the glider?
You think about it in your eventualities before you even launch, shouldn't you?
Yeah.
Think about that crosswind. So
the eventualities are not just for the launch, but it's about the other stuff that's going on around you. And if you think other eventualities, I can't think today, I don't know, just ask some other pilots at the launch point. What do you think are, certainly instructors, but maybe just your mates at the launch point. What might you think of today? What's the gen? If you're going off in a cross country, what's the state of the fields? If you're going off in the circuit, we got this crosswind, so it's going to be a real ball ache if we need to do a circuit on this side, to recognise that. Now, having kind of made the decision to do a circuit on this side, recognizing that we've got this crosswind, because we've hopefully thought about it before we've gone, before we've set off on the winch launch, perhaps, or even the aerotow. What can we do to try and avoid it when we're flying the circuit then?
Perhaps start with a very wide high key area.
Yeah, so start instead of starting in the normal place, we'll start out here somewhere and accept perhaps that the glider's going to drift in as we go down the downwind leg. But that's okay, because we know it's going to do that, and at least then we can see the landing area, perhaps. So just plan for that. Yeah. Okay. So we've got this crosswind. I'm just going to start up here. Nice wide circuit. That'll sort me out. Yeah. Something like that.
Well, as a student, I've been trained to have a look at the field, you know, under a certain angle. Can you hear me?
Yeah, got you.
Yeah. So thank you, Mike. So being trained to just having a look at about 35% degrees, sorry. Not well, it could be a bit confusing for someone like me. Sorry, guys, being a beginner. So I'm not sure, sorry, that grabbing the plane would be so annoying about having a look on the circuit. Well, it's because first, usually I'm at the front seat, so I'm not so annoyed by well, by the wings actually. So, and if I can say that I've been flying power plane, and so crabbing and decrabbing was something quite usual. So I don't think it would be such a problem. So yes, before the launch, in the eventuality, just having a look on, on the socket. I can't remember the name of the wind socket. Is that the right word?
Windsock, yeah.
Yeah, wind socks, not socket. Sorry, wind socks. So could it be? Well, in the eventuality, so you know, eventuality, launch brake, a wing falling down, and the wind, and check the direction of the wind. Remember, so to have just a suggestion.
Yeah,
that's what
but I think no, quite right. I mean, it might not increase your workload very much, but remember what we were saying before about it will increase it a little bit.
Yes, it will. Yes.
And what we're trying to do, and yeah, I mean, you know, we all like to think that we're really good pilots and that we can take on, you know, some of these issues and just deal with it. You know, what's the RAF thing my friend used to say? Yeah, they just expect you to be there and cope. That's it. But you know, we don't need to do that. If we just think ahead just a little bit, and we can reduce all this workload to a minimum, and then we don't have to be that superior pilot. We don't have to be, you know, this superstar. We can just fly and enjoy it rather than having to have our workload, you know, increased.
I prefer to have a slightly more pressure before the launch and thinking, oh gosh, there is a crosswind. I prefer to have this slight workload than being on the down leg and then, oh gosh, I'm too, you know, and so
when and
being in a panic.
That can be fun when you got an instructor sat there with you, but when you're on your own, that can get dangerous after a little while, you know. So yeah, it's good fun occasionally to have things thrown at you and the workload to be increased, as long as there's somebody sat with you so that they can just say, oh, okay, you know, I have control, let's just sort this out. But when you're on your own, when you're flying solo, you got to think about these things beforehand so that your workload is reduced.
I have been flying solo and something else, and sometimes, oh gosh, I was not so sure because I did not plan ahead some things, you know. I remember landing a bit too late, you know what it is. You can land about 45 minutes or 30 minutes after sunset. Gosh, I did it once, believe me.
Yeah, it gets dark, doesn't it?
Oh, it was not
So in that situation, then you think if you, well, you know, it's a power playing thing really, but maybe you think, okay, if that's going to happen, then let's think ahead. If I do get back, I can actually land at this airfield instead. And then I don't need to be a superstar landing, you know, landing in the middle of the night. Anyway, so let's just wind this up because I'm conscious of time. We've taken an hour now. So arrive in the correct mindset. So thinking back to the duo discus accident, you know, I think I remember CFI at Poppington used to say, oh, I think most members come and put their brain on the fence on the way in, you know. I don't subscribe to that. But if you're not in the right mindset, occasionally I'm not in the right mindset, and you have to just say, do you know what, I'm just gonna you know, sit it out today. I'm not gonna fly, just because you just don't feel, you're not feeling it. It's only a spot, you know, we're only doing it for a laugh, so you know, there's no point in pushing these things. Promote that open and honest environment where everybody speaks up and voices concerns. You remember that bystander effect that we talked about, that people are willing to say, hey, hold on a minute, guys, stop. What about that? You know, what about that? And sometimes the answer might be, hey, that's fine actually, because X, Y, and Z. But thanks very much for bringing it up. And, you know, just voice your concerns and use the concept of thinking ahead. So you can use threat and error management, airmanship, aviate, navigate, communicate, CRM, all this kind of stuff. I mean, I actually went on the British Airways CRM course at Heathrow, which was really interesting. And they came up with all this stuff that they use, and it's fantastic stuff. But I think if we can just boil a lot of it down into, before you get in the glider, just spend 10 seconds just thinking about, is there anything different about this flight? Is there anything that's going to leap up and grab me on this flight? Is there anything, you know, if you're flying cross country, what are the state of the fields? Where am I routing? Is the, you know, am I going to get drifted into airspace and all that kind of stuff? Have a look at the route on your map. But even if it is just literally, I mean, that is genuinely what I do. Just spend 5 seconds before I get into the glider thinking, right, have I thought of everything? Have I gotten the no times? Have I, you know, what am I flying here? Yes, I've flown this for a while, you know. And I think actually, if we can just spend just a few seconds just thinking about it before we get in the glider. When we're in the air, occasionally, when the workload's low and we're kind of looking around, we're admiring the view, which is, you know, which is why we all do it. Just spare that 5 seconds again. All right, is there anything that I need to think about on the way back to the club or on the next kind of portion of this flight that I can do now? So things like, yeah, having a pee, setting the correct frequency on your radio, perhaps if you're going to get near airspace on a cross country. Or just thinking about where the wind's blowing on the ground. Is the wind still in the same direction? Is it still blowing the same? Is the airfield set up the same? If you've been away for an hour or something, we might have changed ends. And that might just give you a bit of an interesting few minutes thinking, oh, hold on a minute. Yeah. So if we can just boil it all down really into this message of, if we can just think ahead a little bit more, we might just avoid some incidents and accidents, because very often when people spin in or stall in and have a problem, you know, it's always the ground air interface, isn't it? It's because they're actually overloaded at that point. So all the spinning in the world won't save you if you're so overloaded that you just can't fly the aircraft. So just try and think ahead a little bit more, perhaps.
Like you mentioned thinking ahead, during my BI training, one of the best tips I think I was ever given was, before you get into the glider, have a clear view of which part of the sky you're going to operate in. And keep in your mind. So with a bit of luck, when you become aware that you're straying out of that, you can get onto it quickly rather than end up doing a circuit on the wrong side with all the problems that might follow. So you're thinking ahead, as you say, before you even get into it, be clear where you want to be.
Yeah, especially when you're instructing, especially when you start instructing, it's very easy to get distracted, isn't it, and try and give lots of value for money, and you end up flying off downwind with a student perhaps flying straight and level, and you really want to just give them an extra few seconds of flight because they've got it now, and that's brilliant. And then you turn around and you think, oh Christ. Yeah, no, quite right. I think that's really all I wanted to say. Just leave you with that last message, really. Unless there's any more comments or questions from anybody.
So Mike, one question for me. I think you've touched on something a little bit while ago that is, I find it quite a lot with gliding. Gliding is a very unique form of flying in the sense that you're not just flying the aircraft, it's a sport. So every flight you're doing, you're trying to achieve something. So you're trying to achieve a time in the air, a climb, a distance, and it's, if there's a good day, if it's, everyone around the airfield saying, oh, today's a great day, it's a 300k, a 500k, a 10 million k, and you've got this pressure to say, come on, I can't fail, this is a slam dunk, this is an easy day. And after you do your aerotow, after 10 minutes you start to realize all you've got is sink. I find that it makes the whole situation very, very hard. And I know, for example, when I did my 50k, I actually had 2 goes at it, and the pressure when I got into the glider the first time around, everyone knew I was doing the 50k. It was a booming day. Everyone was saying, oh, this is easy, you can easily get to Huz Boz, not a problem. And within 10 minutes of getting off tow, I was back on the field. And I remember, it's probably one of the things I'll remember for the rest of my life, and probably remember that better than the solo, is actually the walk back to the launch point, when you sort of think, oh, what have I done? What am I doing down here? And I don't know what's your view on that, but I think that's one, for me, is one of the drawbacks of gliding, that it's a sport. It's about achieving. And if you're not achieving, you feel like a failure. You feel like a failure to yourself and to your peers as well.
Well, I guess I mean, that's something that different people are going to have different, feelings about or reactions to, I suppose. I mean, yeah, I see what you mean. I guess gliding for me has always been more enjoyable than, I've always kind of done it for me. So if I don't really want to fly a 500k today, then I won't. I'll fly a 200k instead and enjoy that. I don't know. I guess it's a personal thing that I don't really feel that pressure because I'm doing it for me. I don't care what anybody. Well, of course I care what everybody else thinks about me, but I also but I also kind of don't care that much either. It's a sport. It's easy to say you should, but you should do it for yourself and not for anybody else. But that's just me. I don't know. Anybody else?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because you want to do, part of being able to stay up is to improve. And if you see other people achieving a lot easier, or not easier things, but achieving a lot more on the given day with a given set of conditions, and you can't even stay airborne for 10 minutes, it does take a toll. And
right,
okay,
I must admit, if I fly a competition, for instance, and I don't get round and almost everybody else does, then that feels really bad. Yeah, I know what you mean in that case, because I've kind of put myself in that. I suppose it's the same thing. I put myself in that position. I put myself in the position where you're testing yourself with everybody else, and you're comparing yourself with everybody else, I suppose that's what you're saying, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the thing. If everyone sets off on a given day with more or less similar things, and you're the only person that doesn't achieve it with, you know, a decent glider, amazing conditions, it doesn't matter how successful that is. And I think that's part of the reason then you've got the press home hiders and, you know, just carrying on at sort of sometimes the expense of flight safety. Because on the back of your mind is, if I don't achieve this on a day that is a 300K and I can't even achieve a 50K, then I might as well just pack it in and go home.
The best thing to do is buy a K8, and then whatever you do is brilliant.
I'm surprised you're not selling another type of glider, Peter. You're not promoting your usual machine.
That's true.
The big mistake you made that day, Tiago, was announcing to the entire club on WhatsApp and everyone, making it so public that it was your 50K attempt.
But that's the thing, because you need a crew, because you need a ground crew, you kind of need to ask people. But I remember the feeling that when I got to the airfield was a bit like dead men walking, more than, you know, today's the day I'm going to do my 50K. And it wasn't until I think like 3 days after I did my 50K that I realized I've done my 50K, and actually I've done almost 100K in one flight. And it was the feeling on the day, it actually took away from the enjoyment. And I know when you guys sort of came and picked me up, I was sort of happy about it and so on, but it actually took 3 days to sink in what had actually happened because of all the pressure to try to get there.
It was a great drive down to Husbos to come and pick you up.
I suppose, again, it's a kind of perceived pressure, isn't it? Because, you know, we all worry that we're putting somebody else out when we land out and all that kind of stuff. But actually, most of the time, I quite enjoy going on. I quite enjoy a good retrieve, especially the meal on the way back.
This is what I was saying about. This is what I was saying about the psychology of. It's not a bad thing to land out. It's kind of, there's a bit of, you know, Tiago and I are obviously both quite new to the sport, but actually you've got to get your head around the fact that it's part of gliding. You land out. You can go enter competitions in the future. You're going to land out. It's just part of the sport.
There is an element of luck.
When you're a beginner. You think of it. Oh my God, you mustn't land out. I don't want to land out. And I guess that's not a good mindset, because you've got to. If the situation means you've got to land out, you've got to make that decision early, but without the peer pressure of not making that decision, if you like. Yeah,
and again, you just got to do it for yourself. I mean, a lot of this stuff is actually mentioned in my book. So if anybody wants.
You've written a book.
I know. I've seen it. I've got it through the post today.
So when we're allowed, I mean, there's a special. Tiago decided to order one from the website, but there is a special. There is a special rate for the club members, which is £20 instead of 25. You know, see me at the club, and unless you know, I need a favour like from Jason to take these bolts out of my cylinder head, in which case he can have one for nothing. Anyway, I find all the kind of, not the psychology necessarily, my wife's not here, but you know, certainly the way people think about gliding and the pressures that people put on themselves when they're flying. And actually, one of the things that I think I say in the book is, it's not worth, you know, you've just got to, when the pressure's on, you're feeling this huge pressure about landing out, for instance, or oh, I've messed up and I'm going to have to land out now, and it's all, you know, I'll just try this last climb over here or whatever, you know. You just got to step back from that and say, do you know what, I'm just going to land in this field here, because it's not worth losing your life. You know, none of this stuff none of this stuff matters. None of the peer pressure matters. Pete Gill will come and get me.
Other price.
I think he's done that twice now. You know, just sod it. It's not worth. It's just not worth having an accident over. I'm just going to concentrate on getting this thing down in one piece now. sod the rest of it, you know. And that goes for, you know, quite a lot of the other stuff. I don't know.
Well said.